Living in your truth, I think, is the best thing that you can do for yourself, for your family, for everyone around you, because without that, you're bleeding your traumas onto people that never caused them in the first place.
Welcome my guest, Kimberly Shannon Murphy. She's a leading Hollywood stuntwoman who has served as a double for numerous A-list actresses, performing in over 133 feature films and television shows, including Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Captain America, The Old Guard, Bird Box, The Hunger Games, and so much more. She is a 2-time Screen Actors Guild Award winner for Best Stunt Ensemble and has been recognized for numerous award nominations. For years, she propelled her body through dangerous spaces, medicating the trauma from her childhood sexual abuse, which is the adrenaline rush that came from pushing herself to the absolute limit. But as Kimberly learned, no matter how much you suppress your past, it always catches up with you. Releasing her new book, Glimmer, Kimberly details her remarkable journey to the top of the field as a Hollywood stuntwoman for many A-list celebrities, including Cameron Diaz, Charlize Theron, Angelina Jolie, Taylor Swift, and Sandra Bullock, while carrying the pain of her childhood of sexual abuse in a family that refused to acknowledge its reality. In her beautifully written, honest memoir, Kimberly reflects on her past and present, chronologically her path to recovery and calculating the long shadow of trauma. Glimmer is a story of one woman's quest to reclaim her life and shine the spotlight on a dark topic of intergenerational familial abuse. Glimmer is an emotional roadmap for others who have suffered abuse and childhood trauma, offering them hope, healing, and inspiration. Welcome back to another episode on Passion, Love, Pursuit podcast. My guest today is a very special one, and I've yet to have such a deep conversation about something so uncomfortable, if you want to say, to talk about, but so necessary to bring light and awareness to sexual trauma and the abuse that happens in generations and the impact it has on families, on people, and everybody in the same environment as a person that's been traumatized. So my guest today is Kimberly Shannon Murphy. I am just so honored to have you on, and most importantly, that you're sharing your story and you're just shining a light on something so dark, because I think it's something that a lot of people need to talk more about so more people could heal and know that they could break free from generational trauma. So thank you for being on the show and having the courage.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I kind of mentioned, what this topic is going to be about, it's not a lighthearted one. It's an intense one. And I know her story, which we'll go much into today, is intense. And I know it could create a lot of emotional response, especially to some of those listening today. So I just want to give you the strength to listen to this episode in its entirety and, open your mind and your body up to receive the wisdom shared by Kimberly today. And know that you're not alone, that if Kimberly is here as a survivor, as somebody that is sharing hope and resilience, and that she has been able to break free of the generational trauma she endured in her younger years, which we'll talk about today, that you too have it in you to do that too. So I just want to welcome you all in the space to receive everything shared today. So Kimberly, going into your story. As I was mentioning to you, I just started to read your book or listening to the audiobook of Glimmer, which is a story of hope, healing, and recovery from trauma, specifically sexual trauma that you experienced. So it is a deep, deep story and very emotionally triggering, especially for those that have experienced it. But if you could kind of share wherever you would like to begin of your experience with your sexual trauma and abuse at a very young age.
Yes. So the book is basically a memoir, and we sort of go back and forth in my life, but we start actually, the book prologue starts with me as a stunt woman, and sort of how we do a scene where it sort of expresses how my trauma was bleeding out into my life into my 20s. And basically, that was the trauma of being sexually abused by my grandfather from the age of 2 to 11 when he passed away. And my mom was also abused her whole life. And, he had so many victims. It's so hard to say how many people he affected. But the reason I wrote this book, and I feel like I did it in such a way where I don't go into detail about my abuse. And I did that on purpose because A, I didn't feel it was necessary. B, I wrote this book for survivors, and I wrote this book for people like me so that they could feel less alone and feel heard and feel validated with what they might be going through with memories, or just dealing with your trauma from your childhood, which comes up through your adult life, no matter how hard you try to push it down. And so I didn't want to be triggering to the people who I wrote this for. I wanted it to be a book that was more of, you get the gravity of what happened to me, but also the inspirational side of how I sort of got through it and my journey through it, and how I got, I'm still getting to the other side. I think that's something that's really important. And I've learned through doing so many podcasts now is that we have so many people out in the world who are, and it's so easy to just be on Instagram and put whatever underneath your name that you're, and we have this false idea that everyone has sort of arrived, or these people that we follow have like arrived to this like healing space where they no longer have triggers or feelings, or that they're just like these people that we want to be. And I just don't think that's realistic. And I think it's really important that people can see that it's okay to be triggered, and it's okay to have these feelings, and it's normal. I think when we are looking at these people that claim to be, healed, and, if you do this and this, you're going to be in this space, and it's just not that linear, and it's not that easy. And so I have chosen to be vulnerable and come out and speak about it for the people that feel like I feel, that feel like, oh my God, I went through this thing. I'm never going to get through it. And how do I get through it? And look at, what all these other people are doing, because Instagram and social media can so do that to you. And I think it's really detrimental. And I think it's important for people to see that, we're human beings, and we all have had our own journeys and our own pains, and that we all process it differently, and that's okay. And that we all need to just be really kind and supportive to each other.
Yeah, I think it's so important that you shared I think a lot of people that go through any sort of trauma, big T, small t trauma, they think that they're alone in it, and they feel like, oh, why can't I heal? Why can't I feel okay? And then they have this idea, like you just said, that we arrive and that we're fully healed. But I think it's something that's ongoing for the rest of our life. And like you said, we will have these triggers, and they're meant there to be a sign that something is to be looked at and
Yes.
worked on. And I know, like, I've been in this situation. I'm sure you've felt this before. Like, you've done all the work and you feel finally okay or good, and then something else happens. You're like, I had to do the work more. Like, there's more work to do, and you kind of get sick and tired of doing the same work, if you want to say. And I think there's a lot of people that feel like that. But the thing is, I think, as you said, we're all human. We will experience triggers, and they're there to teach us something. They're there to guide us to our greatest self. And so I think it's great to let people know that they're not alone. And I think that's what's so important about your book, and also the potential of there being a movie about this. I don't know if I could speak about that, but I just think that in general, I just think that more of these conversations need to be had, because I think there's so many people that feel alone and they feel that they can't survive what they've endured. And you're very much proof of that. And so, going a little deeper into your story, if you don't mind, can you talk about, because this started at a very young age, like you said, about 2 years old to age 11 when your grandfather passed away. But can you kind of share some of the experiences? And also, I'm very curious, when you endured it at such a young age, did you know what was going on?
It was, and I think that that's something that's really important to speak about as well, is that, and I've so luckily been able to connect with these amazing trauma doctors through this experience and through my book, and have had so many of them endorse my book. And speaking with them, I've learned a lot about trauma in a different way that I never had before. And Dr. Gabor Mate said this to me in one of our early conversations, which I think is it's so important for people to understand who have suffered incest, especially. He said, Kim, your primary trauma was not actually the sexual abuse. He's like, I'm not trying to belittle or downplay what you went through, but your primary trauma was that you didn't have any adult support around you, because if you did, the abuse would have never happened in the first place. So I think that for me, my biggest message is that there's a whole system around the abuser that allows this kind of abuse to happen, and that those people are adults, and that everyone needs to be held accountable for their part in, when I was being abused, it was happening in a house full of adults. It wasn't like my grandfather would take me, out somewhere and we were alone. It was like Christmas and, holidays, and we spent a lot of time with them in general. So it was happening under everybody's nose. And my grandmother was a complete narcissistic woman who was just a horrible person. And she was fully aware of what was going on. There was many instances where I remember as a child, her seeing things and just like walking away. And so for me, being so young, even though I knew that it felt wrong in my gut, that like there was something that didn't feel good or didn't feel right, it was just being accepted by everybody. And so I just felt like, okay, this just must be what life is. Like every family this must just be how families are. And so it really wasn't until, honestly, writing my book, I had a lot of my family had issues with me telling my story, and a lot of them walked away from me, and I chose to walk away from a lot of them because I realized that it was actually the whole family system that was really toxic, and that was allowing the abuse to continue, and not in a sexual abuse way, but we had our trauma, and then we get older, and then we have children, and then we put our trauma on our children unless we deal with it and heal from it. And, it's not that easy, obviously, and it's an ever growing process. And we're, every day is, for me, actually, for me, honestly, like working on it. And I have some days that are worse than others. And I feel like, it was just really important for me to be able to step out of the system so that I could see with a clear lens how much the toxicity of my family was still continuing. And I didn't want to be a part of it anymore. And I didn't want my daughter to grow up in it. And so I walked away from a lot of people too.
And this really started to take place when you started to write the book. Is that what you were saying? Wow.
Yes, it did.
When did you start writing this book and have the courage to actually put this forward for everybody to see?
It's been 3 years, like the whole process of it, of getting, of writing the proposal, of HarperCollins buying it, of the writing. It's been 3 years. So through that 3 years, a lot has happened. And I think when you see your story on paper, And especially when I listened to the audiobook for the first time, because I don't read it, I had one of my actors read it. It's really, like they say, when you tell a story to someone about something that happened to you, when the words are coming out of your mouth, you actually realize how bad it was. And when you keep it kind of in, you're just like, okay, and you're grappling it with yourself. But when you actually vocalize it and speak it, you realize, oh my gosh, this was horrible. And it's still continuing to be horrible. And if I don't do something about it to change it, I'm just dragging my daughter into the same thing that I was in, just in a different way.
Yeah. Wow. So it seems like there's been many, many years and decades that you've been processing and working through. And I'm sure there was a period of your life where you weren't necessarily working on the trauma. So can you kind of share that in between time where you didn't really know what was going on and possibly your triggers, maybe things were manifesting like anger, addictions, or whatnot? Because I know a lot of people that have been sexually abused, uh, they don't have or correct me if I'm wrong, of course, because this is your experience. They don't have a relationship with their body, a healthy relationship with their body. And so they will somewhat abuse it. Was that part of your journey? Or can you talk a little bit about that with what happens to sexual abuse victims?
For me, I think it's different for everyone, but for me, I felt completely disconnected from my body. So my body, I like to say, didn't feel like it belonged to me. And it really, because it started at such a young age, and because he was so horrible with the way that I was abused, he made me feel that way, that, this is why I was put on this planet, was for him. And, I was like, belonged to him somehow. And that was just what it was. And so after he died and through my 20s, I just was really disconnected from myself. And I was still really sort of, what we used to call it was like, oh, our family's just enmeshed. We're really enmeshed. We're really close. Now I know that it was just, we had no boundaries, like, at all. Didn't even know what the word was. Now we have so much language around it and so many doctors coming out to speak about it, which is so helpful. But there was no boundaries in my family. And so I went through a drug addiction. I had an eating disorder. I was a cutter. I went through a lot of things that I didn't really feel in my 20s that I was going to have a life. Like, I couldn't see a future for myself. It just felt like every day was like a survival. Like, I was just surviving day to day. And I didn't feel like I was ever going to, I didn't have those, when sometimes I hear people say like, oh, I pictured my wedding, or I pictured, what house I would live in, or that wasn't even something that was on my radar. It was just like, survive, 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 get through the day, do what you have to do. And that's just was my mindset for a really long time.
Yeah. Wow. Uh, One thing as I was listening to your book is you walking through the remembering of what happened and your experience. And it was actually, you didn't know if it was just a dream or an illusion. When did you come to the realization that this was something that happened to you, and what age was it? And like, what was the process when you came to the realization what happened to you, and how did you speak about it, if you want to say?
I was 15, and I was having a lot of what they call body memory. So my body was remembering the experience, but my brain was not remembering the experience. And now we have so much science behind it, which I wish I had at that age, because it would have made me feel less crazy, which is partly, why I wrote this book, is so that people who have been abused feel less crazy. Because when you do have your memories, it is, and I have a circle of friends that have had similar experiences, and we all feel the same way about it, which is just that, you feel like you're making it up, like you're making some crazy thing up in your head. It makes you feel insane. And then when you speak it, I remember when I first spoke it to my mom, I said, I think that something happened to me. I just am having these flashes in my head, and I don't know who it was, but as soon as the words came out of my mouth, I was like, Kim, why are you lying? Like that was like my first thing that I thought. And which is really interesting. And I'm not alone in that. I have a really close friend who's very similar. And she went through a situation with her father and felt the same thing, that she was like, as soon as I spoke it, I felt like I was lying. And I said, you know, looking back, I realized that that was just my abuser in my head, you know, that voice that was still embedded in my brain, kind of overriding my truth. And so, you know, my mom brought me to therapy, but my mom was also going through her memories at the same time. So it was a very difficult time in my life because my father didn't believe me. And so I wasn't validated there. And I think for him, it was more that if he believed me, he had to accept the fact that this happened, this horrible thing happened when he was around, and he couldn't accept that. So it was like easier for him to be like, okay, Kim's not, you know, she's like a drama queen. That's what I was in my family. And so, and my mom was going through her own memory. So I was very alone in that process as well when I first started remembering, which was extremely difficult.
Wow. You know, your mom, as you speak about your mom, I know she didn't go through the same healing as you. Like she was obviously much older when she started to realize what has happened to her. But I know you talk about how she was so groomed that she wasn't, even though she witnessed something, she never stopped it. And I think that's what's important to talk about, is this generational trauma, and it doesn't end unless you address and heal yourself. And so unfortunately it was able to happen to you because she didn't protect you from that, or anybody in your family protect you from it. And so how is your relationship now with her, if there is a relationship? Because it's like, I know when you're with somebody or beside somebody that is a memory of your trauma, it's really hard to continue to heal. So I'm curious, your relationships now with your father, your mom.
I don't speak to anybody but my mother, actually. My mom, you know, has been a tricky one because she does try, she does listen. We do have really open conversations about the abuse. She has apologized to me and taken responsibility for what happened, which means a lot. But at the end of the day, and it's something that I don't think she'll ever really be able to wrap her head around, is like she's still very much involved in the family, which of course she is. She has grandchildren. She wants to be in their life. She wants to have a relationship with everybody. You know, everyone's her child. But for me, it's difficult. That's the difficult part because, you know, it's almost where I was for a long time, where I kind of explain it as like you're on a wall and you have one leg over and one on one side and one leg over on the other side. And it's like you're just kind of being pulled in both directions. And that's what I feel like is going on with my mom at this point. You know, because I have tried to sort of like, I've done a lot of psychedelic healing, and I've tried to sort of, you know, get her to, you know, and I think my mom has just gotten to a place where she has healed enough where she can just like survive and live her life, but she hasn't gotten over that really big hump of what it looks like to, my whole family's in this state of, I know I was abused. I don't want to know anymore. I don't want to remember anymore. And I was there too for a long time. I don't need to remember. I know that it happened. I want to move on. That's fair and good. And I think we all go through that when we've been abused, especially if it's happened for a long time and there's a lot of memories to be had. But what I realized when I started doing my psychedelic experiences was that I started having a lot of memories in my psychedelic experiences. And so I realized really the gravity of the abuse, and that it wasn't just sexual abuse, that he was really like, he tortured me. He tried to kill me on many occasions. I don't know that he ever would have killed me, but I think that I believe that was going to when I was a child. Obviously, it was like terrifying for me, but I think that he used it as just like to put that fear in me to not say a word and to just stay silent. Um, so I know I remember more than anybody in my family. And what has been good about that, but also really hard to kind of sift through because it's all like thrown at you. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And then you have to, then you've got to dive back into the therapy game. And, then you feel like I'm 46 years old and I'm still, like you have those days where it's so frustrating because you feel like it's never ending. And actually it is never ending. But I think that it's the way that you decide to live your life. And that's not meant to be said that all days are going to be perfect and beautiful and lovely, but it is living in your truth, I think, is the best thing that you can do for yourself, for your family, for everyone around you, because without that, you're bleeding your traumas onto people that never caused them in the first place. And my one sister, who I was very close with, as soon as I got the book deal, just like stopped talking, hasn't talked to me in 3.5 years. And that was really painful for me for a long time. And then I realized she can't be around me because I'm too triggering for her and I know too much and she doesn't want to know. Like her opinion about it is, if I go there, I'm never going to come back from it. And I talked to Gabor about this, and his answer to me was, which I thought was, so simple. I'm like, why did I never think about that? Which is so true. He said, Kim, you've already been through the worst. The worst is over. Like, this is your time to now get to your authentic space and heal it, and surround yourself with people that help you heal it and give you a reason to be here. And so that was really eye-opening for me. I was like, you're right. I did. I've survived the worst. Like, he's dead. He can't hurt me anymore. And it's all about what I choose to do with my life now.
Such a powerful message. I love Gabor. He's so brilliant when it comes to trauma, and he really just lays out in such simple terms to very much deeply understand it. I listen to him all the time. He's brilliant.
He's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so great that you've been interviewed by so many great minds that are able to help you still walk through the healing. And I've
Oh, yeah.
listened to those interviews. And I know that it's still eye-opening, some things. It's really beautiful. I wanted to touch on that one important point you said is a lot of people don't want to revisit the trauma, so they don't. And so they repress it and they remain silent. And isn't that one of the worst things you could do?
That's what actually causes illness in your body, is when you hold
Exactly.
it in. And it was really interesting because I did an interview where I spoke about how I feel about forgiveness. And of course, you can take like a 10-second clip and then, everyone online wants to judge you about who you are as a person. And it was an interesting moment for me. It was the first time that I had ever been in this light where people were kind of coming at me for saying, like, I don't forgive my grandfather because I don't. And all of my doctors who, they had me second guessing, and they're strangers, obviously. Like, I don't know who any of these people are who are just passing judgment on me. But I got really triggered by it, and it brought up a lot for me, because what I realized was, by them questioning me, it made me feel like I was 15 again, being questioned by everyone. Like, did this actually happen to you? Or, and so that's why I say, like, to act like we've all like arrived to this like amazing space, isn't really real. We all still go through our struggles and we all still go through things. And I think it's important to have that vulnerability, especially when we're putting ourselves out into the world in such a way, because that's the reality of it. Like, especially when you've had capital T trauma, like, you don't just wake up one day and you're like, trust me, I wish that's what it was. I wish that I could wake up one day and be like, I'm just, feel amazing and I'm never going to be triggered and I'm always going to feel this happy. And it's just not the way that it works. And that's another reason why I wrote this book was because I feel like if I had this book when I was 15, it would have been a game changer for me.
Hmm. I know it's going to be a game changer for so many. And I think it's, again, I think more of these stories need to come out because it happens, unfortunately, way too often.
Oh, so
Uh,
often.
and it's generally in the family too that this type of trauma happens. It's just unbelievable. But I think it's, I actually heard that clip on the forgiveness, and I wanted to bring that up because a lot of people have heard you need to forgive to fully heal. And I've always kind of believed that. Like, I believe like in forgiveness, right? I believe in that. But when you spoke about it, I was like, gosh, I could only imagine that being exactly your truth. Like, how do you forgive somebody? It's like not forgivable, you know?
Not
And so,
forgivable. And it's
yeah,
also okay, like with my mom, and when they took the clip, obviously you're taking it off a 2-hour conversation. So,
yes,
it's all what it is. But when I was speaking about my mom, I was speaking about I don't forgive my mom for not being who I needed her to be at that time. I forgive my mom as an adult because I have a relationship with my mom and I love my mother, and my mother was also a victim. So I definitely have, struggled with that with her. There's some parts of me that forgive her, and there's some parts of me that I don't know if I could ever forgive, knowing that she walked in on me being abused and then just walked out. Like, that's a really massive thing, because for me as a child, what that told me was, this is okay. Like,
yeah,
this is okay that he's doing this to you. And so, like, what a mind fuck for me as a 6-year-old. And
absolutely.
then I look at my daughter and I think, my God, knock on wood, I know, because I know the mother I am, nothing like this would ever happen to her. But if it did, even in her older years or something, I would never say to her, like, you need to forgive this person in order to heal it. It's just, if you ask any top trauma doctor, they're going to have the same answer. And I actually did a live with Dr. Amani yesterday, and we spoke about it. And she said now there's actual science behind it, that if you forgive somebody that is continuously hurting you, and I'm not talking about like your friend does something that hurts your feelings and she says sorry and you forgive them. Of course, like, it's not that I don't believe in forgiveness. It's
Right.
that
Of course.
there are some things that are just unforgivable. I do not believe that my grandfather, a grown man who for, almost 10 years, a few times a week consistently, hurt me and, gave me herpes, and I couldn't give birth to my child normally. I couldn't
Yeah.
breastfeed in a normal way because it was triggering and it brought up flashbacks for me when I breastfed her. So it's really hard to forgive someone who's taken so much from your life.
Yeah. But
And
it's still a part of your life that
yeah,
because it carries in the triggers and yeah, absolutely. And, again, I honor you for your vulnerability and truth in that, that it doesn't need to be somebody else's truth, really.
yes,
It's still
totally.
it's yours to take ownership of and your life to respond to it as you may. And there's nothing victim about it or immature about, like, it's, completely honor your vulnerability, encourage to speak in your truth. One thing you talked about is your identity, how you didn't have an identity without your grandfather when he passed. And I would love to talk about that because how did you, because I want the people listening that have possibly experienced something of this nature or similar. I think that's the truth, is that their identity is this, like, I'm, a victim. And a lot of people that have been traumatized feel a lot of shame and a lot of blame, and they put the blame on themselves. Like, was I wrong for doing this? Was I the cause for this? What could you say to those listening that feel that, and how have you been able to reshape your identity? I know, like, I'm sure you've done a lot of therapy. I'm just curious, like, how did you start to really unravel and become who you are today, Kimberly?
Well, I really needed to separate myself from him. I do a lot of inner child work, which has been life changing for me. I realized that, and you'll read it in the book too, like I had this anger for my child self. I was like mad at her. And that was, it may not make sense, but that's just the way I felt. I was like, why didn't you fight harder? Why didn't you, this is all in my head, what I was kind of saying. And I think I just needed to put the blame on someone because he wasn't alive and I didn't have him to go to and confront or to put him in jail or do any of those things that he deserved. So I sort of detached from my inner child. And what I realized is that she actually needed the exact opposite. We needed to be like reunited and connected. And I got to do that through psychedelics. And it was a really beautiful, incredible experience. And now I like to say it, we live in the same body. And um and it was interesting because after my first psychedelic experience, I had a lot of stuff happen to me in the shower. So showers are difficult for me. And so I remember being in the shower and looking down at my feet, and they looked like my little tiny feet, like as a kid. And it was completely freaked me out. So I emailed Gabor right away, of course, because he's like bless his heart. He was like so good with me. He always writes me back. I'm like,
Mm.
this is what just happened. And he said, well, now that you've connected with her, she's going to start showing you more of herself because she trusts you
Wow.
and
Oh,
because she
wow.
feels safe with you and she feels that you actually are starting to understand. And I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like for all these years,
Mm.
she didn't trust me. Of course, she didn't trust me because I was pushing her away and I was blaming her for something that she actually survived, not me. I mean, my child self survived all of that. She was the one who did all of the brave, amazing things. So being able to connect back with her was something that was very life changing for me.
Wow, it's so beautiful. And I mean, I know a lot of people have probably heard about inner child work. So, through all the healing modalities you've done, as you talked about the psychedelics, is that like if you were to recommend the best things that have worked for you, for somebody that has experienced this, what would be your suggestion? Because I know sometimes talk therapy could continue the cycle, right? Like never ending cycle of therapy, right? But there's so many other modalities out there. And I know, as you talked about, the body remembers.
Mhm.
I know a lot of people have had great experiences with somatic healing. And so I'm just curious, where would you best guide people? I know like some people are like, oh, scared of psychedelics, but it's been shown of the healing modalities for this reason.
Yes. And I was scared of the psychedelics. When Gabor brought it up to me, I was like, oh no, I'm not doing that. Like, and also because he had said, MDMA, and I thought, and just like pictured myself 20s at the club. And I'm like, so
Right,
what? I'm
right.
going to do MDMA at my house and like get naked and jump in the pool? Like, it didn't make sense to me. And after we hung up, I did some research about it. I watched his documentary that's called Wisdom of Truth, I believe. It's mostly about addiction, but at the
Okay.
end of it, he works with a cancer patient through psychedelic therapy. And the cancer patient was given like a death sentence, and the cancer went away.
Wow.
And after I watched that, I reached back out to him and I said, I think I want to try it. And it was nothing what I thought it was going to be, like at all. For me, it took away my fight or flight. And by the way,
Mm.
you do integration. So you do therapy for a month with the doctor you're going to be working with, and then you do your journey, and then you do therapy for a month after with the same doctor.
Okay.
And I think the biggest piece of that for me was that I met this incredible woman who does my journeys with me, who I felt safe with. So for the first time in my life, I could be vulnerable. And that's what the drug does for you. It just allows you to just kind of sit and relax into yourself and get into your head, but in a safe way. And you have someone sitting there with you who you feel really safe with. And that was something I never had my entire life. So it was just life changing. And then I also do a lot of IFS therapy, which I find to
Oh, yeah.
be extremely helpful, which is internal family systems. That was started by Dr. Richard Schwartz. I actually do therapy with him. My friends make fun of me because they're like, of course you do it with him. Like he doesn't take patients anymore.
That's
But
great.
he but
Okay.
he has built like a huge community of therapists. So you can find a therapist in your area that does that work, and they work very much on the parts of you. And his belief system is, and I won't articulate it as he does because he's who he um, is that basically when we go through a trauma in our life, we get stunted in that age. So whether we're like abandoned or abused or shamed or whatever the feeling is, like if it happened when you were 6, then that part of you is like stays in a 6-year-old space. So when you're triggered, if like you've ever watched anyone get triggered and have a response and you're like, whoa, that was really intense for what this is, it's because they're reacting from their 6-year-old space or their 7-year-old space that was never healed. And so it's a wound that they haven't revisited, a part of them that they haven't revisited and healed. And so coupling those two together for me, after doing many years of talk therapy, which is where I definitely needed to start, because I feel like for what I had been through, if I would have just jumped into psychedelics, I think it would have been too
Too
jarring
much.
for me. And
Mhm.
I don't think I would have been able to go as deep as I was able to go if I didn't have like a base of a really good therapist that I had for many years.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I have actually had several people on the podcast that have talked about the family system therapy and the body parts and whatnot. So, and they spoke about that being the biggest healing part of their journey. And so that's definitely something I think anybody listening that is experiencing anything of this sort should look into further and see if it's something to explore in your healing journey. So let's talk a little bit about, there's so much I want to talk about. I mean, honestly, like there's so many ways we could go because this is such a deep subject. But being that you're a stunt woman, you've been a successful stunt woman for over 20 years, one of the best in the business. You have been known for this. And I know that, people know you for jumping out windows, falling off treadmills, running through glass or whatnot. But a lot of people probably didn't know this story that we're sharing today. And so I'm just curious, when you entered into being a stunt woman, was it something that helped you feel safe in your body because you were able to control the outcome and also possibly control the fact that, like, oh, even though something is hurting me on the outside, I could withstand this because I've endured something so much more painful?
Yeah. And that's the prologue of the book basically. And you know, I think there's probably a lot of stunt I know stunt people that have been abused. I think that we definitely have a different mentality. And I think that if you wake up in the morning, you're like, yeah, I'm going to do a car hit, like super exciting. I'm going to get hit by a car. Maybe there is like something that's happening around I'm sure, fighters too. I'm sure a lot of fighters have had trauma in their life. I know of one that has. And so for me, I think it was especially be in the beginning of the business, and this didn't carry over into my later years, but in the beginning of the business, getting injured was something, as long as it wasn't like me breaking a bone or something, because then I couldn't work, or me cutting myself or getting a black eye or anything like that. It was something that was enjoyable to me. It was almost like when I was cutting, because people are asking you if you're okay and asking you, recognizing that there's something that's hurting, recognizing that there's something that is painful because they can see it. And that was giving me validation, I realized, on the inside, because my inside was hurting so much, but nobody could see that. I appeared to be this, when I started in the business, it was rare to find like a tall girl who could do gymnastics. And so I worked a lot and, doubled, kind of everybody tall and blonde in the business. And that was something that just happened. And it took me a while to realize, to like connect the dots of all of that, of why that was enjoyable to me, or why I was like, okay, I'm gonna, you know, it was like the attention. I liked the attention of it.
I think that's really good to mention, because I think a lot of, I believe I've either heard you speak this or read it in your book, is that the validation you didn't have when you were younger, you seeked when you were older. You needed that external validation because it's something we all need when we're children. We need that safety and validation, and to be heard, and safe, that we're in the safe space. And I think you spoke about how you needed that external validation. And so I think a lot of people could recognize that when they've been hurt so much, is like something to help them feel good about themselves because they're hurting so much. What can you
Mm-hmm.
say about that? Like how, because I know when people think of the external validation, it's not something that's per se healthy. So what could you say about maybe a healthier perspective on external validation in your
Well,
experience with that?
I think it comes from us being validated internally, which is the work that we have to do in order to not feel that we need that, right? So it's like you have to go through the healing process and the journey in order to not have those feelings anymore. I don't have them anymore, which I'm grateful for, but it took me a really long time to get there. And it's really important for people to, I think when you've been abused and you are so disconnected from yourself, it is really hard to recognize those things. It's really hard to figure out or even realize you're doing them, because it's like something you've always done. It's like being in a bad relationship when you come from parents that fought all the time, or divorced, or there was a lot of anger and a lot of screaming, and that's what, when you become an adult, that's what you gravitate towards.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't feel good, and it's not right, but it's comfortable, and it's where you feel safe in a weird way, even though it's actually where you're the least safe, but you
Right.
feel a safety in that because it's all you've ever known. So it's really having to take that step back, and sometimes just really being alone, I think, with yourself, and not having relationships, with anybody for a little while, to kind of heal those parts in you, so that when you go out into the world, you're not seeking a relationship that's going to bring back old things and old patterns and painful memories, which is what my first husband and I were married, and that's what that relationship was. He was a survivor, I was a survivor, we connected on that, but our relationship was like one big explosion every day, and it was because
Mm.
neither one of us were healed, and so we were
Yeah.
just taking our stuff out on each other. We didn't even know what we were fighting about half the time. And so I think it's just us needing to be aware of that, which is really hard. It's like when you're born into a normal family where your parents give you tools, to go out in the world. Like, I talk to my daughter about boundaries all the time, and we have these, big discussions, and discussions that were never had with me. So when I got to my 20s, like, I had no tools. Like, there was no tools. I had to create the tools and put them in the box so I could use them, but I had to do that for myself. And it's really difficult. That's the hard thing, is like, it's not something that happens in one day. So you have to be patient with yourself. You have to love yourself enough to know that you're worth it, and that you're worth having a good life, and that just because you weren't given that, and the cliche of like, it's not your fault, is what everyone loves to kind of throw out there. I don't think it's helpful for survivors, to be honest, because yes, we all know in our head it wasn't our fault, but it's
Mm-hmm.
what your body stores and what your body feels. So it's getting it out of your body and healing that what's happening internally. Because yes, I know in my head it wasn't my fault what happened to me,
Right.
but do I go to dark spaces sometimes where my body does feel that way? Of course. How could it not? It shapes your life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And speaking about your daughter, I would love to talk about this. I believe you have a 9-year-old now.
Yes.
And so I imagine this has been your purpose as well, to not pass this on in any shape or form to your daughter, and not have her experience even a sliver of what you experience, especially with your family. So what have you put in place to help prepare you as this mother and be able to talk to her? I don't know if you've talked to her about certain things, but how have you, what's some non-negotiables you've put in place to help ensure she doesn't have a sliver of possibly the parts of you that haven't healed yet that come out in certain
Yeah.
ways?
Well, I had to really start putting up boundaries. And something happened last year with my family that she was left out of because everyone was angry with me about writing the book. And so that was, I think, kind of the moment for me where I stood back and said, okay, I'm done. Like, I'm done with this. She's crying in front of me. At that time, she was 7, crying in front of me, asking me what she did wrong. Why was she not included? Mommy, like, I love my cousin so much. Why would they not include me? And just as her mother, I was like, okay, Kim, this is the moment where you show her what we do when someone does something like this to us. We don't put up with it. We don't, no one ever apologized to her, except my mom was a part of that. And my mom, and that took me, I didn't talk to my mom for 2 months. And I just kept saying to my mom, you need this was done on purpose. And until you're ready to sit down with her and apologize to her and let her know that it's not her fault, because her 7-year-old brain thinks it's her fault no matter what, we're not moving on. And so they did. And I was there and the conversation was had and we moved on because there was an apology, but nobody else apologized to her. And it was really interesting when you're looking at it through your child's eyes, because she was given a Christmas gift that year from her aunts that were a part of this, leaving her out. And in the card, it said, "We love you so much. We miss you." And she looked at me, she opened the card and she looked at me and she said, "Mommy, this makes no sense. How can they
Mm.
say they love me and then not include me?" And it was so innocent and so real and so true. And I said, "Capri, you are 100% right. That is why we have removed ourselves from them. Because
Mm.
if they don't realize that this was such a painful experience for you, then those are not the people we have in our life. And I want you to be surrounded by women who are loving, who have boundaries, who understand how to treat another human being." And that was a big lesson for both of us. And unfortunately, I had to have a little bit of a conversation with her around why, because I
Mm.
just had to explain to her, like, just because someone's an adult doesn't mean that everything they do is right. And your aunts are hurting a lot and they're not dealing with it in the right way. And so it's coming out in the wrong way. And unfortunately, it came out on you this time. And so mommy's like, this is not happening again. So we're going to walk away unless there's like a change. I always say, like, I'm sorry is I'm sorry, but unless there's a change in behavior, it's not, the sorry doesn't mean anything, because then you just turn around and do it again. So yeah, it's been, constantly navigating it. And I know there are a lot of my sisters that have chosen, the last time I knew, to not speak to their children about our past. And I think it's too much of a massive thing not to talk about when it's appropriate for her to know about it. I just feel like, you know, she'll understand so much more of me, so much more of why I was the mother I was, and just understand life more. And we are very truthful in this house. And I didn't grow up that way. I grew up in just lie after lie after lie, and it didn't feel good. And being able to be honest with her, and it's just easy. Like, it's actually so easy to just be honest, because that's really all they want, obviously in an appropriate way for their age, but that's really what kids crave. They want you to be honest with them, and they know when you're not, is the thing. They know when you're not telling them the truth.
Yeah. And I think it's so important you mentioned this, because I think a lot of people that now have kids of their own, they know that, like, maybe sometimes their triggers come out, but then their kids don't understand it. And like you spoke about your family and how they acted. And so it is understanding, like, when you could, and like you said, in the appropriate way for their age, talk to them about it. I think I was listening to this, that you said when you first told your daughter, this is so cute. I heard this on some interview, I think. She says, Mom, did somebody hurt you? And you said, yes. And she said, did they hurt your heart, or did they hurt, what did she say? Did they hurt your heart?
Said,
or did they?
Well, when all of this happened, she's a very assertive little girl. And she kept saying to me, Mommy, I need an example. Like, you keep saying everyone's hurting, but I need an example. Like, what do you mean? And thankfully, my husband was with me, because I get obviously very emotional around this subject. And he said to her, Capri, our number one job is to protect you. And she said, yes. And he said, I always get emotional when I talk about her. He said, Mommy wasn't protected when she was little. And Capri said, well, what do you mean? And my husband just said, Mina, which is what she calls my mom, Mina's dad hurt Mommy. And she said, did he hurt you with his hands, or did he hurt your heart? So, and then I just said both to her, and she just hugged me and she said, Mommy, I'm so sorry. And then that was that. Like, that was it. And we didn't have to go into detail, and I don't plan on going into detail with her. I'm not like, going to traumatize her by telling her the things that happened to me. One day, if she chooses to read the book, she is welcome to read the book. And I say this all the time. Like, I literally also wrote this book for the next generation of my family, so that when they're looking for answers, which they will be in 10 or 20 years, about their parents and why certain things were the way they were, then this is something that they can go to understand fully what our family was.
I'm so thankful for you writing this book and sharing your story so vulnerably on so many platforms. And you're really you're standing in full courage for other survivors. So I just thank you for all of that. I mean, it's remarkable. And I'm so touched by your story and your courage.
Thank you so
Truly.
much.
Your book is called Glimmer. What does that mean to you? What was the meaning behind that name of the book? Because this book could be called so many different things, but I'm just curious, why did that speak out to you?
It's interesting because after I named the book, I found out that there was a doctor years ago, Dr. Deb Dana, who actually, she does a lot of, I don't know the correct word for it, so I'm not going to try to say it, but where she says your glimmers are the opposite of your triggers, which I actually did not know when I named the book. I named the book Glimmer because I felt like that was my inner child inside of me, and like the spark that refused to give up whenever I felt like I wanted to give up. And I always felt like there was a glimmer of light inside of me that pushed me and kept me going, even on days that I really would have rather not have. So that's what it was for me.
So beautiful. And I think everybody could really reflect on that in their life, that there is a light in you that is waiting to just shine out on the world. But what we need to do is that healing work. And I know you obviously, as Gabor Mate said, like, you've already endured the worst pain. And I know revisiting traumas is something that honestly most people don't want to ever do, but it's truly the only path of healing, because
Yes.
I think the suppression and silence is is what prolongs the pain, if anything. So again, you're just you're a model of courage to really speak for others and show people that there is hope in healing, and there is hope to break free from the trauma that has tied people down for so long. I wanted to ask, oh yeah, in all these interviews, because I know we kind of spoke about this briefly, in all these interviews you've done, what do you feel has been the most eye-opening for you in learning about sexual trauma and what this has impacted you in your life?
The biggest gift for me through all of this has been the doctors that I've been able to connect with. Um, I've, if you would have told me a year ago that I would, be talking to Dr. Amani or, Dr. Schwartz or Gabor, or Dr. Perry, all these, amazing doctors that Dr. Nicole, all these incredible doctors that I've been able to connect with. That's been a really great thing for me, because I feel like incest is something that there's a reason why there's not a lot of books about it. And it's because there's so many layers to it. There's so many family members that are connected to it. And so there's so much pain around it, and there's so much shame around it. And so that has been my biggest gift, is to be able to talk to these doctors that I don't know if I would have ever connected with if I hadn't written the book. So, and to have them validate my feelings and to have them, give me advice and be a sounding board has been the biggest gift through all of this for me, for sure.
It's so beautiful. Yeah, that is so amazing. And I think it's very interesting how you said the reason why there aren't many books like this is because the layers, because as your family, they didn't want you to share all these things, but because of your purpose behind this book to help others, that was important for you. And I just, again, I want everybody to get this book. And I want people to pass this along to anybody that can benefit from this book. Is there anything else we could do to help support you? Anything?
No, the biggest thing I always say is I really just do Instagram. Like, I have all the accounts, but I actually answer all of the people that write me as much as I can, and the answers are coming from me. And I've had so many people write me such amazing things about what they've gotten from the book that are survivors, and that to me is my why. And so I just want everyone to know that, if you read my book and you feel like you want to reach out, that I am so open to, connecting in that way. And that's, part of why I did this. And so I just want people to know that this is my gift to all of the survivors in the world. And I know that if you are a survivor of any trauma and read this, that it will truly help your life.
Mm-hmm. So amazing. Thank you for that. Well, just to wrap things up, I would love to ask you my closing question that I ask every guest. And that is, if you were to share a piece of wisdom, a life lesson that you've learned along this journey of your life, and you just feel everybody needs to hear this right now, what would that piece of wisdom be and why?
That nobody else matters except for you, that you matter the most, and the life that you create matters the most. And that just because somebody is your blood does not make them your family, unfortunately. And I know that's not everyone's situation, and that's amazing, but I know it's a lot of people's situation. And you can create a life of love and of acceptance with a chosen family, and it doesn't have to be your blood. And I think that's really important, because a lot of people get so, a lot of people that have reached out to me is a lot of that. Like, I just feel like I can't heal. Like they say, you cannot heal around the people that made you sick. And I fully, fully believe that. And even if they don't realize that they're making you sick, but you do, it's okay to step away and heal. Doesn't mean that that's always going to be the situation, but it's okay to give yourself permission to take care of yourself, because no one ever took care of you.
Such a powerful message. I completely agree that, of course, you can't heal by the people that hurt you. And so there has to be boundaries in place. And even if that means breaking toxic ties, for you to finally do the healing. So, Kimberly, where can people best find you? I know you say you mostly live on Instagram, and I know you have a long Instagram handle.
Very long. It's very long. Kimberly Shannon Murphy Stunts. But I think if you put in like Kimberly Shannon, it usually just pops up. But yeah, and then all my Instagram has like all the interviews I've done. And, you know, if you just put it in a Google search, you can find all the interviews I've done on YouTube and stuff with all the doctors and all the podcasts and things. And I'm continuing to do them. So yeah, just trying to reach as many people as I can.
It's remarkable. And I just thank you again for your courage and your vulnerability, and for being here and sharing your story on this podcast. And of course, everything, your book, Audible, is available. I'm listening to the Audible right now. It is a very detailed story. And as I was speaking to Kimberly before we press record, you could really grasp the story as you listen to it. And I've been enjoying this story because I think that there's so much to be learned from it. And it makes, I think, you know, all of us, again, we want to feel safe and validated and feel like we could be wholly and complete and loved just for who we are. And I think this is, as you share your story and also your healing, it gives other people permission to be exactly that themselves, and they are loved and worthy just as they are, and they have the potential to heal. So thank you again for everything. I so appreciate you and can't wait to share this, and everybody go grab the book. And
thank you. Thank you for having me.